Have you been on a Facebook group recently and seen someone talk about overlanding tax? I feel like I see it more and more. Every time I go to a Facebook group about overlanding, people are talking about the overland tax. And that's fine. I'm kind of a budget-minded person, and I typically talk about things in terms of budget. And when I say budget, I mean trying to save money wherever possible, right? So take your total amount of money that you've got and try and prioritize the right things to spend money on and the right things to save money on. However, I feel like this overlanding tax term has kind of turned into the next it's just car camping sort of craze or cliche that's been going around, right? Like that was forever. People were like, oh, it's just car camping. Oh, I did that in the 80s. Oh, I did that when I was 12 in the 60s, right? Just all these people complaining about people going out and camping for multiple days out of a rig that they're dependent on and then calling it overlanding, and apparently that's not really what it is. It's car camping, right? So that's what I feel like the overlanding tax term is becoming. It's becoming this thing where people think that the overlanding tax is just a term to throw around whenever anybody buys anything that costs more than $25 or $40, right? Like if it's in that range where you can get it really cheap and you don't even have to worry if it falls apart after one or two trips, it's not overly priced. But if it's more expensive than that, then it's part of the overlanding tax. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think that overlanding tax, while kind of true to some degree, is being way overused, and why I don't think you should pay attention when people say everything's overlanding tax, no matter what the product is. So if you want to hear more about my ideas of why I think the term overlanding tax is an overused term, and why we should be attentive when people say overlanding tax all the time on anything that you purchase, stay tuned.
Understand where it came from, but you got it, I got it. It began in the land of the sandstorm. I fought it, though I wanted everything to do with what you give to me. Loosening my grip.
All right, guys, so as I mentioned in the intro today, I'm talking about this term overland tax. I feel like it's overused. I feel like it is kind of quickly becoming like the new trope or the new, commonly used phrase in overlanding Facebook groups, in overlanding YouTube videos and comments. I see it all the time. This thing's too expensive. So I wanted to kind of touch on that a little bit today because I find that really fascinating, right? And I agree with you guys in a lot of ways. And what I mean by that is, I have always been, and I've been doing this for 5, 6, 7 years now on YouTube, 8 or 9 just in real life, kind of going out, camping out of my vehicle, learning, been through 3 vehicles now. I've had, quite a bit of experience with overlanding, if you will, considering I'm not crossing international borders. I may not get the stamp of approval of the real overlanders, but I do go out and I basically live out of my vehicle for multiple days at a time, and I'm totally reliant on it. And I count that as overlanding. So that being said, this overlanding tax thing, talking as a cheap/budget-minded person, I think that it makes sense in certain instances. And I think that the instances where it makes sense are things where there is a very similar or exactly the same product that exists and maybe is in a different industry or a different space. And then a company acquires that or remanufactures it or, buys it from Alibaba and relabels it and puts the term overlanding on it and then sells it for twice the money. That to me is 100% overlanding tax in the works, and it's terrible, right? Like we all hate that. We don't like to pay extra money. If you the best example I could probably give you is rooftop tents. That's kind of where my mind goes with this is, you've got some of these like American companies that are literally just buying tents in bulk or maybe even having them designed in China and stuff like that. But then they're just buying them for, $300 to $600 a piece and then having them shipped over here on a container crate or something like that and then reselling them for $2,500 to $4,000. That to me is totally overlanding tax, right? And not to say that there's no value in that either. I want to be clear when I say this, that there is value in working with an American-based company that has taken the risk to, ship those over and will warranty those and help with parts and things like that, or repairs or, replacement if necessary, if one of their tent fails. So there is some value in that, but is there 4 to 8 times the value, right? If you can get a Wildfinder or a Nature Nest or an Open Road or a Top Oak tent for, $900 to $1,500, if you literally get one that is almost exactly the same from a materials standpoint, a design standpoint, and it costs $2,500 to $3,000 or $3,200, then that to me is just a little exorbitant, right? Now, and some of those companies do sales and things sometimes where their $2,500 tent will go on sale for $1,800 or something like that, and it gets it a lot closer. And again, having that ability to warranty things, having the ability to get a hold of someone, whereas with the Chinese-based companies, it may be more difficult. There is some value in that. So again, I'm not saying that you should never buy anything from American companies at all. I'm just saying that there are a lot of companies that have kind of jumped on this bandwagon, bought products from China, relabeled them or white labeled them, and then they're selling those. And that to me is the clearest definition of what the overlanding tax is. However, the purpose of this episode and kind of what brought it up is I've had several people recently on different things that are like name brand good things that serve a purpose. And people are like, oh, this is the overlanding tax in action. Why would you pay $100, $120 for a mat to put down on the ground that, sure, it has a waterproof bottom and a nice cushy top. And it's made of, 95, 100% recycled plastic material. So they actually put effort into trying to protect the environment and stuff. And sure, it comes with a nice waterproof bag. And sure, it comes from a name brand company that's going to give you warranty and take care of you, but you could do the same thing with a beach towel, right? Or you could do the same thing with, turf from Home Depot for $30. And while that's true, right, there are always instances where you could take a thing that exists that costs X dollars and you could replace it with a thing that costs Y dollars and is much less expensive, but isn't intended for that purpose. I actually am very proud of myself for trying to do that as much as possible. There are multiple things that I've built and installed on my truck that are completely not intended for vehicular use, like my Unistrut roof rack that I made on my old Xterra. I took some galvanized Unistrut and I basically fabricated my own roof rack that I attached to the stock Xterra roof rack, and then I was able to attach my awning and my rooftop tent to the stock roof rack. Now, in that case, I saved a ton of money. I spent $100, whereas if I had replaced the entire roof rack on my Xterra, I would have had to spend probably $1,000 to $1,200 on the rack. I would have had to pull up riv nuts from the roof and expose holes. I would have had to reseal those holes and reattach the new roof rack. There was a lot of risk and expense involved with that, so I just built my own out of Unistrut. Now, is it the same thing, right? If my Unistrut falls apart and my tent flies off on the highway, am I going to have any legal recourse against a company that maybe made a roof rack to get my money back or replace my tent? No, because I built it myself, right? So again, there are always pros and cons. It's never 100% clear cut on who wins, in that instance. If you make cheaper stuff, if you do it yourself, if you buy things that aren't intended for that use, it may not last as long. It may not work as well. So there are some pros and there are some cons. But again, that being said, and taking into account like the Rumple example, right? This overland mat is like, I think $120, and it is purpose built. It is very wide. It's like 4 foot by 4 foot. So it's a very big area. The reason that I picked it up is because I'm going to use it for when I get out of the shower, right? So my shower is an all-top shower. I'll put links to all this stuff in the description down below, but I have an all-top, built-in shower room that I have on the side of my truck. And I use that for when I get showers and stuff, but I will say I've done that a few times. It has a floor in it, so you're not standing in the mud and getting all muddy. But then when you go to change clothes, I'm usually waiting for the water to drain out. There's still water in there. My feet are wet. I'm picking up a foot, drying off one foot, trying to balance myself, trying to pull on my pants one leg at a time, put on a sock, put on a shoe, put that leg outside of the tent, right? It's like playing Twister, basically, coming out of my shower tent. And it works, but it's not great, right? Versus most of the time I'm alone or I'm in some place where I've got a lot of privacy, or you could put up an awning with like room walls and stuff where you could change, put your mat under there. But having something like that is, waterproof on the bottom. So it's going to resist mud, dirt, water. On the top, it's super cushy and nice. So you could set your nice clean clothes on there. You can set your shoes off to the side. You can step onto that mat and you can get dressed and stuff. You can fold it back up because again, it's dirt resistant. It's water resistant. Put it in the nice waterproof case. Because it's in a waterproof case, you could throw it in the bed of your truck, and if it rained on it, it's fine. You just take it out of the case, throw it on the ground, it's going to be dry, right? So again, that being purpose built and being $120, yes, it's more expensive than just taking a towel or an old comforter or something and throwing that out on the ground, right? But I guess my point with this is, again, everybody calls everything the overlanding tax if it costs anything, right? If it's like fighting against the machine or trying to, attack companies because they want to charge a reasonable amount for all their due diligence, all the research and development that they do, all of the, design that they have to do, the materials that they have to use, the warranty stuff that costs them money, the shipping, all that sort of stuff, right? And again, I am definitely not pro company ripping us off. Never, ever, ever am I. But I'm just saying that this term has become very prolifically used, right? People just throw it around all the time. So the reason I wanted to make this episode was to kind of point that out and to kind of make us all think about it, right? If you want to use the overlanding tax term, totally fine, but make sure that you're using it in a situation where it's applicable, right? Where it's actually true, and we're not just calling everything that costs money the overlanding tax because it works for what we need and it costs more than $20. Another example that I'll give you that is 100% based on my own experience is sleeping bags, right? I currently run a Sea to Summit 0 degree bag, and it is a very expensive sleeping bag. It is an extra long, extra wide, really super comfortable. It's a mummy style bag, so if you need to zip up, it will actually keep you comfortable at 0 degrees. And I've used it in negative temps and single digits, and it's been a lifesaver. It's been amazing. And before that, I had a Coleman 0 degree bag, which was like 60 to 80 bucks, right? So much less expensive, right? I think it's 80 to 100 now. The price has gone up since I bought those maybe 5 years ago, and then the zipper went out on it maybe a year and a half into using it, and I had to replace it, but it was inexpensive, so I bought another one, right? I think the first one I bought was like 60, and the second one I bought was 80, so I'm $140 into that sleeping bag. Well, guess what? The second one lasted for about a year and a half, and then the zipper completely came off, could not get it reattached on there, just fell apart. So that being said, that's even a Coleman, right? That's not even a no-name Chinese brand or something that I bought off Amazon. That is an actual real brand that makes outdoor camping gear, right? But because I went cheap and I bought those sleeping bags, I was $140 in after about 3 years of using these two sleeping bags. They were lying when they said it was a 0 degree bag, right? Like 0 degree is the bare bones, not even just barely survivable rating. Definitely not comfortable or warm if you are up in a tent and it's in the single digits or negative temps. You are freezing and you're awake all night and you're just shivering, right? So once I switched to the Sea to Summit, I got a ton of comments that were like, holy crap, this is so expensive. How would you ever spend so much money on a sleeping bag? And I think a lot of my like backpacking compatriots, like people that backpack, understand this stuff, right? When you want really good ultralight gear that is going to last for a really long time, that will pack down really small, that will be high quality and last, you have to spend the money, right? I have a buddy who does backpacking. I went hiking with him one time, and I had my like $80, no-name backpack, and I had a plastic temporary poncho that ripped and got me soaked. He had all really nice gear, Columbia gear, name brand REI type stuff. His tent, I think he said, was $1,200, and it was a single-person bivvy style tent. So he had like all this really expensive gear, and I'm like, dude, this guy's like $5,000 into this backpack, right? Like he has all this stuff, all this gear, this tiny little water filtration system, this tiny little camp cooker set, all this stuff, and I was just flabbergasted because this was years ago and I was really, really cheap, then I had no money. And I was like, God, how does he spend so much on backpacking, And again, nowadays, I'm still cheap and I still don't have a ton of money. But what I've realized is, again, buying a new sleeping bag every 1 to 2 years at $80 to $120 that fails, that isn't nearly as warm as a good one, versus like spending the $300 to $400 on a really good name brand sleeping bag. That Sea to Summit came actually with a report, like a printed out report from a third-party company where they send these things off and they test the down in them. They actually test the quality and they talk about the fill and the R values and all that stuff to show you just how good this thing is, right? To show you, they literally spend money to send it to a third-party company to ensure you that this is worth the $400, right? Or $350 that the sleeping bag costs. And you're not going to get that from the cheap brands, right? They don't care. It's throwaway. Another good example of this is recovery gear, right? And again, I've advocated quite a bit for inexpensive recovery gear. I am currently running a ton of inexpensive recovery gear. I think there are certain things you can save on, but it's also a safety thing, right? So with recovery gear, I am taking a chance. I'm rolling the dice every single time that I hook up one of those inexpensive soft shackles, right? That they could fail and potentially cause someone harm. So you do have to be very careful. We are very careful about where we place our winch lines, where we place our recovery straps, where everybody stands. We talk about it quite a bit and we make sure that everybody's safe. But again, you would be taking less of a risk if you spent the extra money and bought the Factor 55 stuff, right? If you bought the name brand recovery gear, it makes things safer. It makes things easier because you don't have to think as much about where you should be standing and what happens if this fails. Not to say that recovery gear doesn't fail if it's name brand. It does, but at a much lower rate, right? It's a percentage game. So it's sort of the same with the sleeping bag. It's the same with the recovery gear and stuff. But my point with all of this is that overlanding tax is a true thing, but it is being overused. I'd love to hear from you guys down in the comments. If you're watching on YouTube, drop down to the comments. Let me know your thoughts on this topic because I think it's fascinating and I think that everybody probably has their own opinions. If you are on Spotify, There should be a spot for comments down below too. If you're listening on the podcast, though, there are links in the description down below to all my social channels. Go join the conversation over there, or join Newbie Overlanders, awesome group that I've got where we all chat about overlanding and stuff like that all day, every day. That would be a good place to do it too. But I would love to hear from you guys on this topic, because I just feel like every time I go to YouTube, I see overlanding tax is real, overlanding tax scam. You know what I mean? Like, I did an episode on just overlanding is a scam not too long ago. In this case, I'm talking about the companies overcharging us, not just that overlanding itself is some sort of a scam, which people seem to think. But so I'd love to hear from you guys on that topic. But so those are my thoughts on the overlanding tax and its kind of overuse. As I mentioned, down in the description are links to Newbie Overlanders and all my social channels. There's also a link to my website where I've got funny overlanding camping patches and stickers. They're really inexpensive. I promise you the overlanding tax does not apply here. $12 for a patch shipped, no tax, no shipping cost or anything like that, flat rate, and $5 for a sticker. So drop down there, check those out if you want stickers and patches. Also below this video, if you're watching on YouTube, is a join button. That's just kind of a passive way to support the channel, get you early access to the videos and these podcasts. So if that sounds good, check that out. And then, of course, there is a link to my Patreon group where we've got a 24/7 Discord. We all kind of chat about our rigs and gear, and we share memes, and it's just a good time. There's over 20 people in that now, and we're having a great time chatting. We try to get together once or twice a year too, and we do a Zoom call every month. So it's actually a ton of fun. If that sounds good, check that out. And then, of course, last but not least, I have all my featured partners listed down below. This is a good example of overlanding tax. Some of these companies charge a fair amount of money for their stuff, but the quality of the gear that they make is so good that, again, in my opinion, it makes sense to spend a little bit more to get a much higher quality product that's going to last for 10 or 12 years versus saving 40% or even 50% and then having to replace it every 1 to 2 years. Like, it just, if you do the math, it makes more sense to have better quality stuff. And all of those featured partners are basically that in a nutshell. They are super high quality companies that make great stuff. So check those out down below and click through those links and go learn more about those companies, because they're just fantastic companies that are doing the right thing for overlanding. But again, thanks so much for watching. Thanks for listening. I hope you guys have a great week, and I hope that you get out and explore. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.